you've mentioned when we chatted before that selling emotions, much like what Taylor Swift does, is key to building trust. So, along those soft skills that you've talked about, how can financial advisors become more like Taylor Swift and incorporate that emotional intelligence into their client relationships to create that same sense of connection and trust that she does with her fans?
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned from an early mentor is that if we continue to speak on very technical terms, there's a great line by Zig Ziglar, which is logic will get people to think, and emotion will get people to act. Right. So if we continue to talk just on the very technical side of things, you're very forgettable. But if you can get an emotional response out of people, that's how people have been wired to connect in that way on an emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
So really good capital raising and really good client relations is being able to have emotional intelligence and to be able to communicate at an emotional level. So it's kind of like, to go back to that analogy where you're saying, well, there's rules don't apply in capital raising or in soft skills. It's more principles. To give you an example, is that if you're married and you have a spouse or partner, and you cataloged everything that you said and everything that you did, and then try to apply that exactly verbatim, so then just a random person, and say, well, this is what I did to find a partner, and I applied the exact same thing a second time and it didn't work. Well, in the rule-based world, or in a very technical world, that should work. It's like code always works, right? Code, just apply the
Right.
exact same code, and that's why it's disorienting, because it's not going to work.
This is the Future Ready Advisor, a show about transforming your financial advisory practice. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan, a wealth management consultant, behavioral scientist, and keynote speaker. In this podcast, I dive deep into the real challenges advisors face and bring you insightful conversations with top industry experts. Together, we'll explore practical strategies grounded in behavioral science to help you better serve your clients, optimize your time, and build a future-ready practice. Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Sam Sivarajan. Welcome to today's episode of the Future Ready Advisor. Today, I'm here with Edmund Chien, a former financial advisor and now coach to capital raisers and executives. Edmund, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to have you. Let me quickly introduce you to our audience. Edmund is a seasoned business and sales success coach with over 20 years of experience in mentoring and coaching. A retired Army paratrooper and former financial advisor, Edmund built and managed a $70 million book of business by focusing on discipline, trust, and genuine care for his clients. Today, he leverages his military and financial background to help others achieve success by coaching financial professionals and business leaders. Edmund, you've had a unique career path that started with a decade in the Canadian Army, where you served as a full-time soldier and boot camp instructor before transitioning to Bay Street and the financial advisory world. Talk us through this diverse career path and how you think the discipline and methodology you learned in the military has influenced your approach in financial services, especially when it comes to coaching financial advisors.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sam. But just to clarify, I spent 10 years in the military. I was a part-time, so I was a reservist, but I spent 2 years of that time as a full-time soldier. A lot of military people tend to be sticklers with those kind of details. But yeah, I would say that military. Like, I would like to say that it was all thought out and calculated, but I don't think I'm actually that smart. I think part of it was when I was in school, I was looking for something to do, and I really felt attracted to the military. There's a lot of different things that it was like very nuanced, but I think a big part of that was things like being part of something that was bigger than myself, as well as learning some valuable traits, learning some discipline, having good mentorship. A lot of those things were contributed to it. So I think that it actually panned out quite well, and it was a great. It was a great way to, it was a great backup when I finished school and I was struggling looking for work, and I ended up going full-time military while I was, and being able to give back, but at the same time being able to gain a lot of experience. So I think it was very beneficial to my transition over into, or my pivot over into financial services.
And what were some of the lessons or skills that you would attribute to your, call it, your time in the military, that you felt helped you transition from a very different world into the financial advisory world?
Yeah, I would say one of the best things. So when I was like a basic training instructor, one of the major things that we employ is something called EDI, explain, demonstrate, imitate, and it incorporates a lot of repetition in coaching. So everything that is taught in the military, both in the British military as well as the Canadian military, it's taught through this method of EDI, especially very complex skills. And it's things that I taught. And then when I went into financial services, I just applied uh, the same approach to learning and applied it to my own development within financial services. So, for instance, when I wrote my CSE and I became a licensed stockbroker, just incredible amounts of repetition. I can't tell you how many times I did the practice test. I just did it over and over and over again to the point where it became like it almost became like just instinctive, and I could just go through it so fast. And that's something that the military taught me. It's just like we had a saying. There's some things I taught in the military where we're gonna keep doing something because I would do a lot of repetition with my students, and a lot of the candidates would say, well, how much longer are we going to do this? And I say, we're going to keep doing this until you're absolutely sick of it, and then we're going to call that the halfway point.
I think that's interesting, and I totally see the application. Can you, for our listeners, dive in a little bit on each of those components, E, D, and I, and what exactly that means? And maybe you can talk a bit about how that applied as in the military, the examples that you use, and how you brought that to bear in the day-to-day life of some of your financial advisory work.
Yeah, EDI is a great thing that I used even to train junior advisors when I was, when I was in financial services, and it kind of goes off that quote that many people have heard, which is, "I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, and I do and I understand." And that it's basically incorporating that. So EDI, the E stands for explain. So whenever something brand new is being taught or a new skill is being taught, the first part of it is explain what the outcome is. The reasons why we're doing this or how it works. All the mechanics is all classroom work. And just because I tell you, it's like if I was going to tell you how to drive a car, I could tell you all day long. You're still not going to be able to drive a car.
Hmm.
So after I explain it, then I demonstrate. So once you get in the car and I'll show you how I drive. And then you observe and then you just watch and see how I do it and take notes. And then after that, then we switch over and then you go off and you imitate me. And it's basically shadowing. So when I was learning about financial services, I would apply this to myself. So I would read a lot. I would seek out mentorship and have people explain. And then for my when I became an advisor, I followed a senior advisor and I went to all his meetings, right? So I would observe. I just sit there observing his meetings. And then after that, for a period of time, I asked that mentor to come to my meetings and to evaluate my meetings and to critique it. And we just went back and forth for a while until I was very, very comfortable and it became instinctive. So lots of repetition. So I asked for that mentorship a lot longer than most advisors did. And even my mentor said, like, I don't know if we want to keep doing that. I did it for a year. And most people was like, oh, we only need to do this for like 2, 3 months. I was like, no, I want to do it for a full year because this is my new job. This is my new vocation. And I want to make sure I really have this down pat. And it was that kind of military discipline and really that stamina that gave me that perspective just to keep going and to learn it till the point where it's instinctive.
Yeah, or muscle memory. I think that's such a great
Absolutely.
insight, Edmund. I know that the research shows that experience, which is to some extent what that demonstrate and that imitate component of what you're talking about, is critical for people to feel comfortable. Research shows that having experience in investing makes a difference in terms of your comfort and your ability to understand the risks of investing. So that EDI framework that you described, I think is critical for new advisors, but perhaps it's also something that advisors can use with their clients to get them comfortable as they develop financial plans or insurance policies or even investment solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of these things is like when we go into a meeting, you're going to be put under cognitive load or cognitive strain. And the more you can prepare, like for instance, the more familiar you are with your investment product, and you can explain it in many different methods and many different ways, the less you have to use that cognitive load when you're in a client meeting. Because most of your energy in a client meeting should be reading the responses of your prospect or of your client. And if you have to go and try to dedicate time to memorizing or remembering verbatim what you were going to say, then you're going to lose cognitive attention and you won't be able to pick up the small cues. So really good client-facing advisors are people that know their material so well they could explain it almost instinctively, so they can maximize their attention towards reading your client and understanding your client.
Makes sense. Now, Edmund, you've spent years working in the financial advisor industry with large banks and insurance companies before moving into the world of capital raising. And I think your focus right now is particularly on real estate projects, raising capital for real estate projects. How are you applying your financial advisory experience to this sort of new role? And what insights do you think that financial advisors can take from your capital raising strategies to grow their own practices?
Yeah, that's interesting because I sort of see myself as like I was a capital raiser from the beginning, and that's how I got into finance. And I would say that I'm a sales guy. Like even when I was in the military, I spent the 2 years that I spent full time it was a recruiter. So that's a form of sales. So I see that my skill set or my value that I brought to financial services is capital raising from the beginning. So, and when I started off in private equity, where you had to be an accredited investor, which is essentially $1 million of investable assets. So it was at a very high level in terms
Mhm.
of capital raising. And I think one of the biggest challenges that, because today I coach people on how to sell or how to do that capital raising. And I think the biggest challenge that I encounter with people that come from a finance background, especially from a very technical background, is that it's a completely different paradigm. So especially people that like I've talked to or I've coached people that come from an engineering background, and there's a lot of set rules that are always going to be the same. 1 plus 1 is always going to equal 2 in that paradigm, right? A lot of engineers also think of very
Mhm.
binary kind of terms. It's either going to be on or off. But when we go to soft skills and when we go to sales, it just completely throws them for a loop because those paradigms don't exist. In soft skills, the difference is that it's like art. So art is we don't follow any kind of set rules in art. Soft skills is a form of art. It's a set of principles, and principles can be broken because people are all different. So today you could say, 1 plus 1 equals 4, and then tomorrow 1 plus 1 equals 6, and 1 plus 1 can equal 2, and 1 plus 1 can equal 1.5. And it's very disorienting for that type of people. And that's the importance of understanding the realm of capital raising and the realm of soft skills, because every client is going to be different, and every client's going to respond in different ways to things that you say. You could say something one way to a client and you close, and you say the exact same thing to the next client and you won't close.
No, I think that's a great point. And along those lines, you've mentioned when we chatted before that selling emotions, much like what Taylor Swift does, is key to building trust. So, along those soft skills that you've talked about, how can financial advisors become more like Taylor Swift and incorporate that emotional intelligence into their client relationships to create that same sense of connection and trust that she does with her fans?
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned from an early mentor is that if we continue to speak on very technical terms, there's a great line by Zig Ziglar, which is logic will get people to think, and emotion will get people to act. Right. So if we continue to talk just on the very technical side of things, you're very forgettable. But if you can get an emotional response out of people, that's how people have been wired to connect in that way on an emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
So really good capital raising and really good client relations is being able to have emotional intelligence and to be able to communicate at an emotional level. So it's kind of like, to go back to that analogy where we're saying, well, there's rules don't apply in capital raising or in soft skills. It's more principles. To give you an example, is that if you're married and you have a spouse or partner, and you catalog everything that you said and everything that you did, and then try to apply that exactly verbatim to just a random person, and say, well, this is what I did to find a partner, and I applied the exact same thing a second time and it didn't work. Well, in the rule-based world, or in a very technical world, that should work. It's like code always works, right? Code, just apply the
Right.
exact same code, and that's why it's disorienting, because it's not going to work. That's where the different. That's where it highlights principles. But when we're talking about an emotional level, interestingly enough, is I went to, like, my bachelor's is a bachelor of fine art in theater, and a lot of people don't realize that. And that's very high level soft skills and understanding soft skills. That's essentially what art or what theater is all about. How do you connect with the audience? And that's my understanding of when I dissect what's going on with Taylor Swift, which has got the highest grossing concert tour in history, is over $1 billion. And what is it about that that's just so attractive to her demographic? I think a big part of that is
Hmm.
being able, she understands, or she has a human experience and a capability to express emotion that resonates with her audience, because her audience can have the same type of emotion, but maybe not the skill to be able to express it. So the fact that she can do that and the audience sees part of themselves in that expression, it draws them out, because it resonates, and that trust starts to build. The more I can see parts of the same, or I can relate to a lot of the experiences that you are talking about, or a lot of the experiences that you're presenting in that type of emotion. If I can see parts of myself, or I can resonate or understand what you're talking about, then that really catches me.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. I think what you're saying is that humans aren't algorithms. And along the lines of that Zig Ziglar quote, I think it reminded me of the quote by Maya Angelou, which is that long after people forget what you said, they will remember how you made them feel. And I think that's the key that you're getting at, is that there is this soft skill, or this kind of relationship thing that you're creating with your client, that is giving them a sense that you're a genuine person, you're authentic, you're relatable. And it's an interesting point. I had a conversation with another advisor, and he talked about 3D listening and 3D talking skills. And what he means is that listening, it's not just listening to respond and ask the next question, but it's listening to understand, and you convey that you understand. And he says part of the way, and I think this is the point you're making, part of that way is that you also share, right? I mean, you're not just asking your client, what are your biggest fears or concerns about not having enough for retirement, or looking after your elderly parents, in an appropriate way, that you might actually share as an advisor your own experience, your own concerns in that area, so that it gives the client a sense that you're having a shared experience, a shared moment, that this isn't simply that, yes, you're the expert, but that you're not talking out of a textbook or out of a code or an algorithm that you're talking about, that you're actually a human being that they can relate to.
Yeah, and to define it a little bit, for was this something that I teach my coaching clients, is that essentially, like, really good capital raisers have the skill set of empathy. Not to be confused with sympathy. Empathy is understanding what it feels like to be somebody else, and what experiences that you're going through. And to dissect it a little bit further, the recipe for empathy, in what you teach in psychology, the recipe of empathy is seen, heard, understood. So do I see you, and do I understand and hear what your experience is,
Mm-hmm.
and do I understand what that means? And when we do that, we start to build this emotional bridge. So I'll give you an example. If you got invited to a party and nobody talked to you, people didn't even acknowledge that you were there, you might physically be there, but you don't feel like you belong to that tribe. Nobody even talked to me, and I didn't match anybody else, and it was just like, you'll probably stick around for 5 minutes. But if I was your host and I saw you, and I just greeted you once, like, hey Sam, it's great to see you, and then I just ignored you for the rest of the night. So I saw you, but I didn't hear you. I didn't, and we don't
Mm-hmm.
understand, right? So I just looked like, practically, you felt like I just looked right through you. But if you can establish those things where you just genuinely care about people, and you see, hear, and understand what they're saying, and you say, well, this is like some of my concerns. These are what I mean. A lot of people, what they say is not necessarily what they mean. And having the soft skills to be able to, like, when they mention something or they say something, it's reading the subtext behind that. What do they
Yeah.
actually mean? What's the deeper meaning behind that? And if you can see that and really understand where they're coming from, you've built a very strong bridge to that person. And it doesn't take long to build that rapport.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to your point, it's seeing that subtext, or at least even recognizing that subtext is there. It may not be that you understand it, but it's an opening that you don't proceed directly to your next question or the next item on your agenda. You dig a little bit further at that point to say, okay, tell me a little bit more about this. I sense there is something more here, that you're prompting that person to kind of open up. Because in many cases, what I found is that the the other person themselves may not be aware of that subtext in a very defined way, that there is something there, but they don't know what exactly it is. And by probing and prompting and encouraging them to explore that a bit further, you're actually getting them to go down a path that they may not have before, right? To explore some issues or concerns or thoughts that they didn't actually articulate in the past.
Yeah, and a big part of that, where that subtext is found, is usually through tone and body language. There's a concept called the 38 55 7 rule in human communication. So 38% of communication is tone, 55% is body language, and only 7% is the actual words. So if you pay attention, I'll give you an example, right? It's like, say, Ed, is there any other concerns that you have? Nope, Sam, everything's fine, right? It's like, and if you read into that, it's like, does it sound like oh, Ed said everything was fine? And it's like, no, if you read his body language, everything is not fine, right? So you've got to pay more attention to somebody's tone, and if somebody's got very closed body language, or somebody's
Yep.
scowling at you, it's like, you know what, Sam, this has been the best podcast I've ever been on, right? It's like, I don't believe you, right? So it's reading that, and that's where the subtext falls into, right? And being able to understand, being able to read people and recognizing. But I've come across a lot of technical people that would just write down, it's like, oh, Ed said everything was fine, and I progressed.
But that's, to me, is bang on, and that's the difference between, we've talked about it or touched on it, between AI and a human advisor, right? AI isn't going to be able to get that 93% of that communication that you said is nonverbal,
Yes.
which is the critical component. A human advisor that has got the awareness to be paying attention to those things is going to be able to run rings around an algorithm or an AI that isn't aware of that and can't capitalize on that.
Yeah, because there's far too many. There's far too many potential reasons. Like somebody could be talking really fast because they're excited, or because they just finished a run, or because they got to go to the washroom, or because they got a meeting in 5 minutes. And you add in all those other things, plus what they're saying, plus the tone, and
Yep.
there's far too many parameters of what's going on to like for. And maybe AI can catch up to it eventually, but right now it's kind of struggling to be able to do that.
I Absolutely. And I hope it doesn't, not because I'm worried about it, but I think that it takes away the humanity of our business, etc. But in the interim, it is a real opportunity for advisors to be able to continue to set themselves apart, not only from AI, but from others in the marketplace who are maybe not able to do it as well. When we chatted before the show, you talked about emotional bonds being bankable. Can you explain a bit what you mean by that and how financial advisors can translate these bonds into tangible business growth?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, like the deeper connection that you have, it really starts to draw people into you. So, when we're talking about capital raising and sales, it's always a struggle to find clients. And the ideal is that when you first start out, it's always what I call a pull. You're going out and you're prospecting, you're going hat in hand, and you're trying to pull people to come in and become your clients. But if you can start to communicate on an emotional level, and if you can start to deepen a lot of those relationships, and people resonate and want to see you succeed, then the polarity starts to change and people start to push towards you because you're an attractive person that draws people into you. And those are emotional. So it starts becoming your capital raising starts to become more effective, and you start to have a lot more credibility. It's basically being a likable person. The more likable of a person you are, the more people are drawn into you, and it just makes your capital raising a lot easier. But it also builds a hedge around your clients, so clients don't leave you, or is not as receptive to leaving you, as well as there's less liability, because if people if people really like, and they will tend to give you, they'll give you a lot more concessions. Markets are always going to go up and down, And
Hmm.
if you have no emotional relationship with somebody and they, the results are not what they expected, they're more likely either leave you or even to, to complain against you. But if you have a deep relationship with them and you've given a lot of concessions and they really trust you and they really have, then they're willing to work a lot more with you and they're going to be a lot more understanding. Just think of the difference between, if you have kids and your kid does something bad, you would approach it with a lot more graciousness and understanding, a lot more mercy than if some random kid that you didn't know and came and kicked you in the shins, right? And or hurt you. And I was like, I'm very angry, right? It's that kind of deeper relationship that it starts becoming more bankable because your business continues to grow. And people start to provide referrals. That's the point of being bankable. The more likable you are.
I like that. I think we implicitly all build currency, whether it's with our colleagues, whether it's with our boss, whether it's with family members. And translating that idea into a financial advisory practice, I think, is important because you're right. Markets are going to go up, markets are going to go down. The returns are going to be there, in one period and may not be there in another period. And the person or the advisor that has built that bankable bond through relatability, through trust, through communication, through added value and a sense of shared values that we've talked about, I think is more likely to survive or go unscathed through these periods of ups and downs that are natural because of what happens in the market or in the economy.
Yeah, it's a bond. I think that's really important. So one of my mentors when I was at as Nesbitt Burns, he said to me that essentially what you're doing, your practice and your clients, think of them like your tribe. And if they feel a belongingness to your tribe, and the way that you build belongingness is seen, heard, understood. And if people feel like part of that tribe, then it's less likely that they leave you when markets go down. Because if your only selling feature is that I can give you great returns better than anybody else, eventually somebody else is going to have a better return.
Right.
You can't, like, that's a very that's a practice that should make advisors very anxious because you cannot guarantee the highest returns all the time. It's impossible. And markets will go down, but as well as performance against other advisors. So that is your only selling feature is on returns. Your clients are very easy to leave you. But if somebody feels like part of a tribe, that they're part of your tribe and your practice, then it's less likely that those clients could be stolen from you. And it's more, and the better you do it, it's not only that clients won't leave you, clients will start to refer you better, the better you can do that.
100%. And again, when we've talked before, this is a process that it's ongoing. It isn't one and done. This idea of building that relationship or that relatability. And the analogy that we used when we talked before was that the client advisor relationship is similar to dating, right? Where trust has to be built gradually. So how does this translate into practical tips that you would give advisors to, similar to dating, to avoid rushing client relationships and instead developing them organically over time?
Yeah, Sam, this is the hard part of capital raising and soft skills, because it's going to be very disorienting. And the answer is going to be it really depends on how you read the other person. So if we use the analogy or the example of dating and trying to go out and date, the people that you talk to, they're all going to be different. Some of them are based on their current life circumstance. They're going to be a lot more receptive and a lot more open, and they'll be ready to go and begin an emotional relationship. But then there could be some others that have just gone through a breakup and they're very guarded, and it takes much longer for them to open up. So reading clients is exactly the same thing. It comes down to experience. So it's many different facets that you start to paint a picture. And really what I explain to people is high level capital raising or high level sales turns into psychology. And it's going into reading body language, but also recognizing what they're saying. If somebody says, "Yeah, I just had, I'm seeing you because I had this. You're like the third advisor that I've had in as many years." And it's like, you know what? It's like somebody said, I've had some three bad breakups, and now here's another guy that's going to go and break my heart, right? And so you can read into that, but you can also have to read the body language. Is a person
Hmm.
very upset and guarded? Same thing with advisors. But if somebody said that, hey, I've had an advisor for 10 years, and we just recognize that we're outgrowing that advisor. We really care for that advisor, but it's just that they don't have the skill set, and that the practice doesn't have the investments that we're looking for. We wish them the best, but we want to look for something else. Then that person's a little bit more not as emotionally raw. So it's reading a lot of these things, not just what they say, but also how they're saying it, to be able to understand how fast can I go. So I think the biggest, like, really good people in that kind of realm understand how much modulation to use. Sometimes when you're new, it's about trial and error. And he's like, you know what? I think I read those cues wrong. I thought it was this, and I went a little too fast, and then they started ghosting me, or they freaked out. You know what I mean? It's like you learn, just like in dating, right? It's like, oh, I met this girl, she was great. She said, call me, and I waited 10 minutes and I called her, and she freaked out. I was like, oh, I guess I did that wrong. Or I waited a week and I called her, and she didn't answer. She was so mad that I didn't call. I was like, oh, so maybe a week is too long and 10 minutes is too fast. So I got to find somewhere in between there. And it's just this
Right.
process of learning, which can be sped up if you have a mentor.
No, it's a great point. And as you're talking, and I think this is probably it resonates with your army background, but it's like special forces or other kind of army units. You train, you get mentored, you
Yeah.
practice maneuvers, etc. Not because that you expect your next mission to go exactly as you practiced it, but it creates that muscle memory, and as you say, that it reduces that cognitive load, so that when you see a new situation, you can decide which parts of your training and experience apply in this case and which ones don't, and how to adapt different pieces of what you've learned for that specific situation. And I think you're saying the same thing when it comes to whether it's dating or whether it's advisors building client relationships. I think over time, as you get more experience, you've got the building blocks that you would bring to each particular situation, but you're not putting it into a linear type of code or recipe that says first do A, then do B, then do C, then do D. You're going with the flow of each situation to kind of adapt as necessary.
When you're dealing with principles, you brought up a very good point. One of the things that one of the exercise, or the mechanisms that we have in the military is commonly used, is when we're dealing with principles and not rules. We go through and we want to do continuous learning. That's essentially what we're trying to do. So there's a mechanism that's used in the military called AAR, and it stands for After Action Review. So, and I use this in my coaching, and I use it in financial services. So when we go out to a sales meeting, we'll have a briefing. So this is let's study about the person we're talking to. Let's get an idea. And the intent or the expectation is to get them to bring their $1 million portfolio over to me. So that's the outcome, that's the objective. Then I go into the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
The meeting is a complete flop, right? So then afterwards, and I think a lot of people don't want to do this, we review what happened, right? So I showed up 5 minutes late, and it's accepting full responsibility. So I showed up late, they were upset, I was flustered, I was sweating, I couldn't find my grounding. Then I went into the
Mm-hmm.
pitch. They weren't really engaged, and then I screwed this part up, I screwed that part up, and then so next time when I go through it, I recognize, you know what, I have to make sure that I'm never late, because it will screw up my whole meeting. That's what I learned. So if you make a mistake, or if things didn't go the way that you planned, it's really important to put ego aside and dissect what happened and go through it, so that we can maximize the learning so it doesn't happen again. And military does that very, very well. A big part of that is not assigning blame, is being able to open up and accept responsibility, because that's where we're going to grow the most, and utilize that mistake as a learning experience so that we get better and better and better. So we constantly do AARs, and that's how you learn in a principle-based world, not a rules-based world.
No, that's a very important discipline, and I don't think it happens enough in practices. And I think the key thing that you've said is it is not about assigning blame. It's not about living in the past. It's not about having regret. It's done. You can't change what happened in that last meeting. But fresh after it, if you sit there and do an objective analysis of what went right, what didn't go right, you can learn from it so that you can adapt. To your dating analogy, that 10 minutes is too short and 10 days is too long, it allows you to be able to pivot and learn from it, so that you've got you've got the background so that the next time, the next meeting or the next opportunity that you've got, you're prepared to knowing what the best practices that you should bring to bear.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a really great book. You were talking about special forces, but there was a really great book by a U.S. Navy SEAL called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willing. And
Mm-hmm.
what he talks about is after when we do an after action review, we if we don't accept responsibility that we had an ability to change the outcome and then analyze that so that I can make a change the next time. If we don't do that, then we'll never change and we won't become successful. So I'll give you an example. So if we went in and say, you know what, I text that girl 10 minutes after she gave me, or I called her 10 minutes after she gave me her phone number and she just blew me off. It's like, well, if we have an external locus of control, meaning it's her fault instead of my fault, then I would say that, well, that because that girl, she just lied. She said, call me, and I called her and it was her problem. So I'm just going to keep calling girls 10 minutes after they give me their phone number. And I'm going to keep repeating that mistake because it's all their problem. It's not my problem.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm willing to examine myself and say, what did I do wrong there? Did I read that cue wrong? And it's like, is there something I should do different? And then you start increasing that time and you start realizing, you know what, I can make a change now if I have the capacity to change my situation. But if you assign blame as somebody else, which is a human defense mechanism. Well, the reason why I didn't pick up that client is because that client didn't realize how smart I am. And then you just realize, no, it's because you were just so offensive and you weren't able to warm them up to you. So if you assign blame to them, then you'll never make a change and you won't improve. But if I say that, what could I have done better in order to close that client? Because there's something I did wrong.
Well, and more importantly, rightly or wrongly, the human defense mechanism is typical, as you say. But the only thing that you can control is yourself and
Yeah.
what you do next. You can't control, even if that client, if it's the client's fault or whatever it is, you can't change that client's values, preferences, approach, whatever. You may learn from it to say, okay, that type of client, they're very analytical, they're very hands-on, may not be the right type of client for me. That's also a learning, right? But it requires that objective, no holds barred self-reflection and analysis to say, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And what do I take away from this interaction?
I would say that that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I've had as a coach for financial professionals. So when I'm talking to people, a lot of financial professionals will try to go in and have an extreme external locus of control. So give an example. Sometimes like, well, I can't increase the book of my the sale. I can't increase my book of business like my branch manager wants me to. Is because X firm over there spends 10 times as much in marketing. So I just might
Mm-hmm.
as well just give up. There's no way I
Mm-hmm.
could beat that. So, and I don't understand why my branch wants me to increase my book of business when they refuse to spend as much in marketing as that other firm. Well, if you go under that premise, you will never increase. So you can't change that. You can't change the fact that your firm is, or you can argue as much as you want. They probably don't have the budget or want to do that or have
Correct.
the ability. So if you say that it's always the reason why I'm not successful is because of somebody else, then you will always be stuck where you are. Instead of saying, we don't have that capability to do that. What do we have the capability to do that I have to go and change my approach in order to accommodate the fact that we spend 10 times less in marketing than somebody else?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. You play the hand that you're dealt, unless you decide you want to get up and go to a different table, all right? But you play the hand that you're dealt. Edmund, we're coming to the end of our podcast, so I have a few final rapid fire questions for you that I ask all my guests. So if you're ready, number one, professionally, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years?
I think the most important lesson I've learned is always have a mentor. Always have a mentor and a senior advisor that you can learn off, and that speeds up your learning curves.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm blessed to have had good mentors throughout my career, and they've taught me, they've radically improved and sped up my development. So totally agree with you on that. Number two, what is one practical tip you would offer listeners keen on applying your insights?
I think this is imperative, is continuous personal growth. So I've had objections. I have had people say, look, Ed, I can't access a good mentor, or I don't have any mentors. I can't find anybody. You can always find mentors. Some of them don't have to be physical. So if you go and find published books, of experienced people. You can have those sort of mentors, like not official mentors, but they can teach you as well, and that goes back to the explain. So go off
Yeah.
and have this mindset of continuous personal improvement, no matter where you are in your career. Always improve. You can always be better.
I couldn't agree with you more. That to me is always something that has driven me, which is that you could always be better. It's not that you're trying for perfection, but progress. I think that to me, I've never liked the idea word best. I think, what does best mean? You're best at what time period? I think the aim should be to get better, always better, because I think all of us, no matter whoever is at the top of the game, can always be better, right? And it's a question of, what do you learn
Yeah.
from each situation? What new skills are you taking on board? And more importantly, applying using your EDI type of framework. Any parting words of advice for listeners?
Yeah, I think part of it is to continue off on that last point, where think of it like pro athletes. They can always be better. Like it's not about being best or perfect. And even if you are best, there's no guarantee you're going to be best next year. Like Tom Brady was the best, but then he can't continue to play forever. Just like we as advisors, and that talks about the human experience. You could be at the
Right.
top of your game. You could be the best advisor that's out there in the street, but the thing is, you can like Tom Brady can always be better, and he always has a coach, right? And now he can't even play anymore because a new kid like Brock Purdy, first time he came out, he ended up beating Tom Brady, right? So
Yeah.
that's an example. I think so. Continuous learning is things like have a mind that always wants to read, always wants to improve, always looking and recognizing that I don't know it all. Like there's more I can learn. So I think the best parting words that I have is it comes from another book recommendation, which is A Curious Mind by Brian Grazer. He's a producer, but he's the producer for Ron Howard. Fascinating book. And he says that they can go into industries they know nothing about. Like they have Apollo 13, for an example. They didn't know anything about space, but they were just
Hmm.
curious enough to
Hmm.
ask questions. And when you have that curious mindset, that's the attitude you have when you meet a brand new person. Be curious because they have a life experience that you know nothing about. So be curious, ask them, be genuine, and really trying to uncover what is it like being you. And when Ron Howard and Brian Grazer do that, they end up making blockbuster movies as a result of that. So in this particular example, it's when you're curious about people and genuinely want to know about them. That's how we build on that bankable. So have a curious mind, understand that there's more out there that you don't know, and then just read and try to absorb it and try to learn it.
And to pick up on that Tom Brady example that you gave, yes, he's not playing football anymore, but he's learning still, because now he's going to become
Yes.
a commentator and probably make even more money than he did as a football player, right? So I think, to your point, the just because a door is closed, and to be fair, Tom Brady's the door is closed for him, and Rafael Nadal just retired, because all of us age, but that doesn't mean that that's the end of the road. It just means that you have to continue to stay curious and learning and adapt and look for the next road that you're going to take, right?
Absolutely. And you're totally right. Like I saw some videos of Tom Brady and he's got like binders and binders that he's studying now to make him become a better commentator. It's that attitude and thirst for continuous learning, regardless, like, even if you completely switch careers. Like I'm retired from the industry now. I don't hold any licenses, and all my energy is focused in on being a better coach. Because as good as a coach as I am, and I can't just leverage it. I can't just sit back on my laurels and then recognize, like I got all this experience. Being a really good coach, the best part of being a coach is diagnosing. It's not about what you know in your experience. It's more about diagnosing what problems people are having, because we're analyzing that principle. This is the exact same thing as what Tom Brady's doing, is that you've got to go and have that energy and have that excitement to go and expand and learn, especially about a realm that you don't know very much about. He knows a lot about football on the field. He knows very little about football talking about it on the sidelines. And that's what is exciting to see him get to that next level and excite. And that's the encouragement I want to have for advisors as well, is just go in and get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeves, study, learn. And that's where the mind gets exciting. It's just like there's a whole world, like it's a hill to climb. Go and climb that hill.
Hmm. And it makes you more relatable to your clients as you're learning new things and being able to relate to them, etc.
Absolutely.
Edmund, this has been a great discussion. If listeners want to learn more about you or find your work, where do they go?
The best place to do is find me on LinkedIn. So my last name is a unique spelling. It's Chien. Interestingly enough, in Chinese, it's the character for money. So all my ancestors were financial professionals, but it's Edmund Edmund. And reach out on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to connect.
That's awesome. Edmund, thank you for joining us today on the Future Ready Advisor.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
In this episode of the Future Ready Advisor, I spoke with Edmund Chien, a coach to capital raisers and executives, about leveraging military discipline and emotional intelligence in financial advising. Here are my 3 key takeaways. Number 1, mastery through E.D.G.E. Edmund shared the explain, demonstrate, imitate, or E.D.G.E framework he honed in the military. This structured, hands-on learning approach builds expertise and confidence. Advisors can use E.D.G.E to simplify complex financial concepts for their clients while enhancing their own skill set. Number 2, the Taylor Swift effect. Like Taylor Swift's ability to connect deeply with their fans by expressing relatable emotions, advisors can forge lasting client relationships through empathy and emotional intelligence. Making clients feel seen, heard, and understood fosters trust and loyalty, what Edmund calls a bankable bond that strengthens practices and shields them from AI competitors. Number 3, the power of reflection. Continuous growth and adaptability are essential. Tools like after-action reviews, or AARs, help advisors analyze their interactions and learn from every experience. This discipline ensures they can navigate the principle-driven world of advising with confidence and agility. As I said in the episode, discipline, connection, and learning are the cornerstones of a future-ready advisor. By combining structure with heart, advisors can build resilient practices that thrive in an ever-changing world. Thank you for listening to the Future Ready Advisor. You've been listening to the Future Ready Advisor. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, or share your feedback wherever you listen. Be sure to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. For more insights on how to keep your practice future ready, visit www.samsivarajan.com. You can find the link on the show notes. There you'll find free tools and resources, along with exclusive bonus content from these podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing more strategies with you in the next episode.